Beneath the surface of World War II lies a shadow history, buried deep in sealed dossiers, erased testimonies, and fragments of orders never meant to reach the public eye. The official chronicles tell of liberation, strategy, and victory, but behind the curtain of triumph, hidden corridors of secrecy reveal a far darker reality. From the icy waters of the Baltic to the scorched ruins of Europe's prison camps, documents long suppressed paint a portrait of betrayal, weapon experiments, and plans that could have redrawn the map of the modern world. These files, declassified piece by piece across decades, do not belong to the realm of rumor or conspiracy. They emerge from archives stamped with state seals, inked with signatures of commanders, ministers, and intelligence chiefs who once held the fate of nations in their hands. What they reveal is chilling. Convoys that vanished without trace, treaties with sinister annexes, camps that doubled as laboratories of suffering, and secret operations that brought the world to the brink of atomic fire years before Hiroshima. Each fragment pulls us deeper into the shadows of a war we thought we understood, exposing not just the brutality of the battlefield, but the moral collapse in backrooms, laboratories, and negotiation halls. Tonight, we step into these forgotten corridors, guided only by redacted reports, blurred photographs, and cryptic signals. Each file feels less like history and more like a wound reopened. These are the records the victors wanted destroyed, yet against all odds, they have surfaced, and now their silence is broken. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iron Wolf. In the final winter of the war, January 1945, the Baltic Sea lay under an iron sky. The retreating Wehrmacht was collapsing on every front. Yet, from the Kriegsmarine High Command in Kiel came a coded directive marked with the insignia of the Reichsadler and a scarlet stamp, Operation Eisenwolf. The orders outlined the movement of a heavily guarded convoy from Königsberg, East Prussia, to an undisclosed destination west of Danzig. Officially, it was logged as a supply withdrawal under emergency evacuation protocols. Yet the markings on the manifests, preserved in fragments within Soviet naval archives, tell a different story. Crates bore hazard symbols uncommon to the Wehrmacht's inventory. Black diamonds, skull insignias, and references to Morgenrot. The surviving pages are stamped Nur für den Führer, for the Führer's eyes only. What followed was not the ordinary chaos of retreat, but a disappearance that has troubled historians and intelligence officers for decades. Soviet submarine flotillas, operating out of Kronstadt, recorded intercepts of unusual German radio traffic on the nights of January 22 and 23. Coded transmissions spoke of special cargo, of priority level clearance, above even military evacuation transports. NKVD naval observers filed a report later classified under Osobo Ważne, meaning top secret, which claimed Soviet torpedoes struck the lead vessel of the convoy near the Gulf of Finland. The explosion was visible for miles. Yet when reconnaissance flights combed the waters, no wreckage was ever found. No oil slick drifted across the ice floes, and no bodies floated to shore. Entire ships, crews, cargo, escorts were erased as though swallowed by the sea. Within weeks, Soviet military investigators began to suspect that the sinking itself had been staged, a screen to conceal the transfer of materials too dangerous to acknowledge. The unanswered question: what had the Reich been moving so late in a war it was destined to lose? British intelligence at Bletchley Park, monitoring Enigma traffic, intercepted garbled signals referencing Project Morgenrot. Cryptanalysts initially flagged it as a Luftwaffe weapons directive. Only decades later, when fragments of decrypted traffic were declassified, did it become clear that Morgenrot referred to experimental chemical agents engineered at facilities in Dierenfurth and Gross-Rosen. The agents, tested on prisoners, had been designed not as battlefield toxins but as dispersal weapons, capable of paralyzing entire advancing Soviet divisions. The convoy of Operation Iron Wolf, according to these decrypted notes, carried not ordinary war materiel, but the Reich's final attempt at catastrophic escalation. Eyewitness testimony from Soviet submarine crews decades later hints at something even stranger. One officer recalled orders forbidding the retrieval of debris after the supposed sinking. Others described radio silence imposed immediately after contact, followed by a directive from Moscow to consider the matter closed. These inconsistencies were not accidents of war, but deliberate suppression. Why destroy the evidence of a successful interception? Unless, of course, the interception had never occurred at all. Unsealed American intelligence files lend weight to this suspicion. In 1946, under Operation Alsos, US teams, scouring former German scientific facilities, stumbled upon research notes referencing a Baltic transfer. These notes indicated that canisters of tabun and prototypes of a new agent, codenamed Sonnenbrand, had been evacuated from East Prussia just days before Soviet forces overran the laboratories. None of these substances were ever recovered. When questioned, captured German scientists gave evasive responses. One, Dr. Kurt Blome, later employed under Operation Paperclip, admitted in a closed hearing that the cargo reached neutral waters. The transcript ends with a redaction stamp and remains incomplete. Historians attempting to trace the vanished convoy encounter silence from every angle. Kriegsmarine records list the vessels as lost at sea. Soviet reports classify the incident under never confirmed. British and American intelligence both contain files with entire pages removed, leaving only the headers, and yet fragments remain, a requisition form for unusual respirators, a letter from Reich Minister Speer referencing safeguarding resources vital to the future war, a Soviet weather log noting heavy cloud cover and frozen seas at the precise hour of the disappearance. These fragments, scattered across archives in Berlin, Moscow, and London, form the outlines of a shadow event. Theories abound. Some claim the convoy was deliberately scuttled to prevent its capture, consigning its crew and cargo to a watery grave. Others argue that the disappearance marked a covert handoff to a neutral vessel in international waters, possibly Swedish or even Spanish, bound for safe havens where Nazi research could survive the Reich's destruction. Declassified CIA files from the early 1950s reference rumors of Baltic canisters resurfacing in clandestine Cold War stockpiles, though no definitive proof has ever been presented. What remains most disturbing are the accounts buried deep in NKVD testimonies. A debriefing report from March 1945 describes a Soviet diver pulled from the icy waters near the Gulf of Finland. He allegedly recovered fragments of a container stenciled with the Reichsadler and a symbol resembling a sunburst. Within hours, the diver was quarantined, his unit placed under medical observation, and all records of the incident sealed. The diver's name disappears from Soviet personnel rosters shortly after. Whether he succumbed to chemical exposure or was eliminated to contain the secret, the archives do not say. The silence surrounding Operation Iron Wolf is telling. In the chaos of 1945, hundreds of ships were lost, yet few inspire such tight-lipped responses decades later. The absence of evidence is itself evidence of deliberate erasure. What was so dangerous, so unspeakable, that three of the world's major powers, all enemies at the time, found common ground in suppressing it? The possibility that the Reich came closer than previously acknowledged to deploying weapons of unprecedented horror remains one of the darkest shadows over the war's final chapter. Today, the Baltic remains littered with wrecks, its seabed a graveyard of iron and bone. Yet divers who search for Iron Wolf's convoy find only silence. No steel hulls, no chemical barrels, no graves, just coal-black water and the weight of a history that refuses to surface. The missing convoy is more than a lost chapter of naval warfare. It is a testament to secrets so corrosive they were buried beneath ice and ocean, guarded not by warships but by silence itself. Operation Iron Wolf has become a legend whispered in archival corridors, a reminder that even in history's most documented war, entire fleets can vanish, taking with them truths too disturbing for victory to endure. Chapter 2: The Forgotten Prisoners of Stalag XIII-D. In the official records of the Nuremberg region, Stalag XIII-D appears as another German prisoner of war camp, opened in 1940 and operated under the command of the Wehrmacht's Prisoner Administration Office. The documents that survived the war describe a facility built for Allied soldiers captured during the campaigns in France and later in Italy. By 1945, the camp allegedly held thousands of American and British prisoners, managed under the thin veil of Geneva Convention protections. Yet hidden beneath this facade was a network far darker than the standard realities of wartime imprisonment. Gestapo Fileno 17, unearthed in fragments from the Bavarian State Archives in the late 1960s, paints a portrait of Stalag XIII-D not as a mere POW compound, but as a staging ground for unregistered prisoners, men and women who officially never existed. A According to intercepted Soviet communications, the camp received covert transports in unmarked railcars under cover of night beginning in late 1942. Unlike ordinary POW shipments, these transfers bore no international paperwork, no Red Cross notifications, and no names on official rosters. The detainees included political dissidents from occupied France, resistance fighters from the Balkans, and even suspected traitors from within the Wehrmacht itself. Some reports suggest captured Soviet partisans and defectors were also among those sent to this hidden wing of the camp. The testimony of former guards, preserved in NKVD interrogation records now declassified, speaks of ghost barracks at the southern end of the compound, sealed off from ordinary POW quarters. These barracks housed prisoners who were never photographed, never reported, and never liberated. American intelligence officers under the post-war Operation Paperclip stumbled upon testimonies from survivors describing human experiments conducted within these hidden barracks. One Polish partisan recalled being subjected to inhalation trials involving noxious gases. Another, a Soviet defector, described injections of unknown substances followed by neurological collapse and paralysis. None of these testimonies appeared in the official transcripts of the Nuremberg trials. Instead, the witnesses were quietly transferred to Soviet or American custody, their accounts buried in intelligence files rather than court records. The Red Cross provides another angle. Their inspection teams repeatedly filed requests to examine Stalag XIII-D in 1943 and 1944, yet these applications were either denied or indefinitely delayed. The Germans insisted that the camp was overcrowded, suffering from typhus outbreaks, or undergoing repairs, excuses recycled to deflect international scrutiny. By the time the US 45th Infantry Division reached the area in April 1945, large portions of the camp had been burned to the ground. Liberators noted the ruins of barracks where ash and charred bones were found, though these details rarely appeared in official after-action reports. The mystery deepens in the form of one chilling document, a surviving requisition order from November 1943, signed by an SS officer named Dr. Hermann Fischer. The order requested delivery of anesthetics, chloroform, syringes, and 80 meters of reinforced chain for use at Barrack Section C. Such a request makes little sense for ordinary POW oversight, but aligns disturbingly with testimony describing restraint and experimental procedures. Soviet archives suggest Fischer later disappeared into the chaos of 1945, his trail ending near Munich. Some whisper he resurfaced in Soviet custody, while others argue he escaped westward under a false identity. What makes Stalag XIII-D stand apart from other camps is its absence in liberation reports. Unlike Dachau or Buchenwald, there are no extensive photo archives, no survivor organizations campaigning for remembrance. Instead, the files remain fragmentary, contradictory, and heavily redacted. In one US Counterintelligence Corps memorandum from 1946, investigators noted, "It is believed that a section of thought-provoking housed experimental subjects. However, evidence is lacking due to deliberate destruction." The memo closes with the line, "Further pursuit not recommended." This chilling, bureaucratic phrase effectively sealed the fate of the forgotten prisoners, consigning them to silence. Eyewitnesses from the local population in Nuremberg add another haunting dimension. Farmers living near the camp recalled nightly smoke rising from the southern end of the compound, far more frequently than crematory operations required for disease disposal. One villager reported hearing screams carried on the wind during winter nights, silenced abruptly as if by chemical suffocation. These testimonies, recorded by Allied field investigators in May 1945, were deemed unreliable civilian accounts and excluded from official reports. Yet their consistency across multiple witnesses cannot be dismissed so easily. The Soviet Union's obsession with Stalag XIII-D suggests they believed something significant transpired within its walls. Declassified KGB records reveal that from 1946 to 1952, Soviet officers interrogated former camp personnel across occupied Germany, focusing almost exclusively on unregistered prisoner transports. One of these interrogations produced the statement of an SS sergeant who admitted to escorting transports from France that contained political figures of influence. He described seeing men blindfolded, chained, and escorted directly to Section C without formal registration. His testimony abruptly ends with the note, "Subject deceased before further questioning." The fate of the prisoners themselves remains unresolved. In the immediate post-war years, families across Europe searched for missing partisans, defectors, and intellectuals last seen alive in Gestapo custody. Many of their trails lead to Nuremberg and then vanish without a trace. No burial sites have been confirmed, no mass graves officially acknowledged. Archaeological surveys of the former campgrounds in the 1990s uncovered scattered human remains, but these were attributed to wartime disease rather than systematic extermination. The ambiguity remains intact, as if history itself conspires to keep their memory buried. The suppression of Stalag XIII-D's truth also reflects the uncomfortable politics of post-war justice. Both Western allies and the Soviets had motives to keep certain records hidden. For Washington, integrating Nazi scientists into Cold War research programs meant ignoring their possible involvement in war crimes. For Moscow, publicizing the camp's activities risked exposing the Soviet Union's own parallel experiments on prisoners. Thus, silence became the common language of victors, and the forgotten prisoners of Stalag XIII-D slipped into the shadows of history. Yet fragments endure: charred requisition slips, missing transport rosters, whispered testimonies of survivors who later died in obscurity. These fragments point to a story too vast to ignore, that within the heart of Nuremberg, a camp remembered only as a footnote in POW administration was in truth a crucible of human suffering, a laboratory of cruelty erased from memory by fire and deliberate omission. Stalag XIII-D stands as one of World War II's most disturbing absences, not defined by what we know, but by the silence of what we cannot prove, and the countless names never recorded, never acknowledged, and never mourned. Chapter 3: The Cursed Treaty of Ribbentrop's Vault. When Soviet archivists opened the iron doors of the Kremlin's restricted vault in late 1991, they expected to uncover familiar documents. The already infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939, long acknowledged as the secret agreement that carved Poland in two and plunged Europe into war. But amid the brittle folders tied with red string lay something more disturbing. Stamped with Joachim von Ribbentrop's personal insignia and marked Nachtnebel Top Secret were a series of annexes never before disclosed to the public. These papers bore no signatures in the usual bold ink, only initials and ciphers, as if even the architects feared their survival. What they described was not the division of Poland alone, but a blueprint for the dismemberment of neutral Europe itself. The annexes detailed contingency plans for the Wehrmacht and the Red Army to partition states beyond the commonly known borders. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark were marked with arrows suggesting economic exploitation and occupation corridors. Turkey appeared as a pivot territory to be handled by Soviet forces in exchange for German dominance over Ireland, which was listed under the cryptic codename Emerald. Industrial plundering strategies were outlined with chilling precision, including quotas for copper, steel, and petroleum extractions. In one annex, a line noted, "To be implemented upon collapse of Britain, joint enforcement." The implication was staggering. Hitler and Stalin, sworn enemies after 1941, had once mapped a second partition of the continent in anticipation of a German victory over London. Western historians long dismissed such claims as forgeries circulated by Cold War propagandists, yet British archives reveal OSS intercepts from 1944 referencing German-Soviet shadow treaties. A decrypted cable between Washington and London warned that an emerald clause exists within documents not yet disclosed, suggesting Soviet acquiescence to German dominion should Britain fall. At the time, Allied leadership chose not to publicize these findings, fearing they would fracture the already fragile cooperation with Stalin. Instead, the annexes were buried in intelligence reports marked for post-war review, never entering the public narrative of the war. Within the Soviet system, the annexes were guarded with equal secrecy. NKVD memoranda classified them under Osobo Ważno, the highest security designation. A typed note by Lavrenti Beria, head of the NKVD, reads, "Annexes cannot be released. Their publication would undermine the heroic image of Soviet struggle." For decades, the existence of such documents was whispered only among intelligence circles, surfacing briefly during Khrushchev's thaw before being suppressed again. The collapse of the USSR finally forced the opening of the archives, but by then, the damage to historical memory had been done. The annexes' disturbing detail lies not only in territorial ambitions, but in their treatment of populations. One protocol, labeled Nachtnebel II, outlines population transfers for security. It describes the forced resettlement of up to 3 million people from contested border regions, including ethnic Poles, Finns, and Armenians. The language mirrors the Nazi General Plan Ost, yet it bears Soviet co-signature codes. If authentic, this suggests both powers intended to redraw ethnic maps of Europe long before the war's outcome was certain. Another protocol specifies that intellectual classes of occupied territories be removed for security, an eerily bureaucratic euphemism for purges that would later devastate Poland's leadership. Skeptics argue that the annexes might have been later fabrications, designed to discredit Soviet legitimacy in Eastern Europe. Yet forensic analysis of the paper and ink, conducted in the early 2000s by Russian historians, confirm production consistent with the late 1930s. Moreover, cross-references to code phrases within German diplomatic telegrams, preserved at the German Foreign Office, match terms found in the annexes. One such phrase, Nachtnebel, appears in a 1939 Ribbentrop cable to the embassy in Moscow, weeks before the pact was signed. The convergence of sources, separated by continents and decades, lends the documents an authenticity too difficult to dismiss. The annexes also cast a chilling light on the post-war landscape. If Stalin had been willing to cede neutral territories to Hitler under certain conditions, what does this say about Soviet intentions after 1945? Were the seizures of the Baltic states and the crushing of Eastern Europe part of an older template, rehearsed in secret collaboration with the Reich before the two regimes turned on each other? One can only speculate how different the Cold War map might look had Germany triumphed in Britain, triggering the implementation of these hidden clauses. Perhaps the most haunting element lies in Ribbentrop's own handwritten marginalia. In faint pencil beside the reference to Ireland, he wrote, "The island will not resist. Dominion promised." How could he have been so certain? Some historians believe informal contacts existed between German envoys and Irish political elements sympathetic to neutrality, though no proof has survived. Another note scrawled beside Turkey's name simply reads, "Oil secured through friends." The vagueness of these words leaves open the question of just how far-reaching these secret negotiations were, and which nations may have quietly participated in discussions never revealed to their citizens. The discovery of the Nachtnebel annexes also explains peculiar wartime intelligence anomalies. For example, in 1940, before Germany invaded the Low Countries, Soviet trade delegations suddenly demanded increased shipments of Dutch machinery via indirect routes. British analysts puzzled over why the Soviets expected access to equipment from territories not yet occupied. In hindsight, the annexes show that both Berlin and Moscow anticipated an eventual joint sphere of exploitation. Such details reveal a grim truth. Even as Hitler prepared to unleash Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, there had once existed a blueprint for partnership in carving Europe like a carcass. Today, the annexes remain contested. Official Russian state historians downplay their significance, suggesting they were drafts never formalized. Yet their language is clear, their signatures real, and their implications terrifying. They portray the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact not as a single cynical agreement, but as the opening chapter of a much broader plan. A plan that, if history had tilted slightly differently, could have erased the neutrality of nations long believed untouched by the war. The cursed Treaty of Ribbentrop's Vault endures as a reminder that behind the visible war of tanks and bombers lay another war, fought in ink and signatures, where the fate of entire nations could be sealed in a few strokes of a pen, only to vanish into locked archives for half a century. It is a story less of battles and more of betrayal, a glimpse into how easily Europe might have been divided not once, but twice in darkness. Chapter 4. The Silent Bombers of Operation Silver Ash. Buried within the labyrinth of the United States Army Air Force's archives lies a series of mission logs stamped eyes only, their existence denied for decades even within military circles. The files, partially declassified in the late 1970s, reference a chilling plan, Operation Silver Ash. Conceived in the winter of 1944, this operation did not target the Third Reich, already faltering under relentless Allied assault, but rather the Soviet Union, America's own wartime ally. The logs reveal a deployment order transferring a squadron of B-29 superfortresses aircraft hitherto reserved for the Pacific Theatre, to British airfields under the cover of routine training maneuvers. Their true mission was buried beneath layers of secrecy, to strike deep into the Soviet heartland should Moscow defy post-war agreements. The details grow darker still. Technical files unearthed in Los Alamos archives describe modifications made to these B-29s. Their bomb bays were reinforced not for conventional ordnance, but to accommodate prototypes of special assemblies. The early, unstable cores of nuclear weapons under development by the Manhattan Project. At the time, these devices had not yet been tested in combat, but their destructive potential was already known to military scientists. Operation Silver Ash was envisioned as a contingency strike, to unleash atomic fire on the industrial centers of the Urals, crippling Soviet capacity before it could dominate post-war Europe. The operations planning documents, signed off by senior officers including General Henry Hap Arnold, reveal the fragility of the wartime alliance. Even before the fall of Berlin, the seeds of Cold War hostility were already sprouting within. Classified American war rooms. The mission logs indicate Silver Ash was scheduled for late February 1945 weather. Reports included in the file track cloud cover over Sverdlovsk and Chelyabinsk, suggesting specific target points had already been mapped. Reconnaissance photographs from British Mosquito flights, long assumed to be routine, were in fact focused on Soviet rail junctions and energy plants. The bombing routes were charted across the Arctic, skirting neutral airspace, with refueling contingencies noted in Iceland. This was no theoretical plan drawn in pencil. It was an operational blueprint, one pen stroke away from execution, and yet the order was never carried out. On February 20th, 1945, an abrupt memorandum from the Pentagon cancelled the operation, instructing that all materials be sealed under restricted category. The reasons for this sudden reversal remain debated. Some scholars argue that logistical concerns, particularly the instability of early nuclear cores, made the mission impractical. Others suggest that Roosevelt, informed of the plan's existence, intervened personally to prevent its launch, fearing catastrophic diplomatic fallout. What is certain is that the existence of such a plan highlights the deep mistrust that already poisoned the alliance. Declassified CIA documents from the early Cold War reveal that the concept did not die with its cancellation. References to Silver Ash protocols appear in memoranda from 1947, indicating that the operations framework was preserved as a template for potential nuclear strikes against the USSR. In effect, Operation Silver Ash was a ghost plan, a weapon never unleashed, yet haunting the corridors of strategy well into the nuclear age. What is most disturbing is the silence that surrounded these files. Pilots assigned to the training missions in Britain reported confusion about the secrecy surrounding their deployment. Some recalled unusual inspections of their aircraft by civilian scientists, men wearing Los Alamos badges, who refused to answer questions. Others noted the heavy security around the storage of their supposed training ordnance. Only years later did fragments of testimony emerge in veterans' accounts, hinting that they had unknowingly trained for missions that could have sparked a Third World War before the Second had even ended. The Soviet Union, for its part, seemed aware that something unusual was occurring. Declassified NKVD reports from March 1945 note unexplained American air concentration in British bases, coupled with unnecessary aerial surveys over Soviet-held territories. One report speculated that Anglo-Americans prepare strike contingencies. At the time, Stalin dismissed the warnings, considering them exaggerations by suspicious intelligence officers. But after the war, when the United States revealed its nuclear monopoly, the suspicions returned in force. It is possible that knowledge of Operation Silver Ash, acquired through espionage, fueled the Soviet rush to accelerate their own atomic program. The existence of Silver Ash raises terrifying questions. Had it been executed, the war's end might have unfolded not in the ruins of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but across the Soviet Union, where millions more lives would have been extinguished in an instant. The alliance that defeated Hitler might have collapsed into nuclear annihilation months before Germany surrendered. History as we know it, the post-war reconstruction, the division of Europe, the Cold War standoff, could have been replaced by immediate global catastrophe. Yet, the documents themselves resist clarity. Key sections remain redacted. Names of scientific consultants are blacked out. Target lists appear with pages missing. Even the cancellation order ends with an incomplete sentence, trailing off after the phrase, "to prevent." Whether it was to prevent diplomatic scandal, technological disaster, or internal dissent, we may never know. The silence is deliberate, and it speaks louder than the words that survive. Today, Operation Silver Ash stands as one of the most disturbing revelations of the Second World War. Proof that even before the Reich fell, the victors were already turning against one another, sharpening blades meant not for enemies, but for supposed allies. It was a plan conceived in shadows, aborted in silence, and buried beneath classification stamps. But its ghost endures, in the doctrine of nuclear first strikes, in the paranoia of Cold War strategy, and in the lingering possibility that humanity came closer than we dare admit to annihilation in the winter of 1945. The silent bombers never flew their mission, yet their legacy remains a reminder that trust in wartime alliances was always fragile, and that history often teeters on decisions made in secret rooms, documented only in files the public was never meant to read. In every war, the victors write the official narrative, shaping public memory through parades, textbooks, and speeches of triumph. But beneath those polished accounts lies another layer. Hidden files, sealed vaults, and fragments of testimony buried in archives where sunlight rarely reaches. Operation Iron Wolf, the ghostly convoy that vanished into the Baltic. Stalag XIII-D, with its unregistered prisoners erased from history. The cursed annexes of Ribbentrop's vault, mapping Europe's destruction in ink. And Operation Silver Ash, a plan to turn atomic fire upon an ally. Each one reveals how much of the Second World War remains untold. Together, they paint a picture of fragile alliances, secret betrayals, and ambitions so dark they threaten to consume not only nations, but the very fabric of truth itself. What lingers is not certainty, but unease. If these 4 files survived, how many others still lie undiscovered, waiting in boxes stamped top secret and never to be released? How many lives, nations, and futures were decided in silence, their evidence burned or locked away behind redaction? And most haunting of all, what if these revelations are not relics of the past, but warnings of a recurring pattern? The quiet deals, the hidden experiments, the plans whispered in secure rooms that continue to shape our present. The archive door has opened a crack, but the shadows inside stretch far deeper. Until more files emerge, these disturbing fragments leave us with a single, unanswerable question. How much of what we call history is only the surface, and how much remains deliberately concealed?